Hey everybody, so we're going to talk about this Javelin flow for a few seconds or a few minutes, however how long it takes. So we're going to start off with talking about what the scope here is, what we're trying to achieve. So imagine you have a database, we'll call it source one, and we want to move that to a staging table, okay? Or a staging database, if you will. Our table, database, tomato, tomato. And then we have a source two, but we only want what isn't in source one to move over to stage. That way we don't have duplicates. Fair enough. And keep in mind, it could be as many as possible, source 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. So before we get started, let's talk about our landscape. Now, I have these set of databases I normally give webinars for with TDM, so we're going to use them. Now, we have one here that I would call source 1 or maybe gold copy. And we're going to look at an adjuster. So if I look at my adjuster here, I should have 40 records, if I remember correctly. Yep, 40 records. Okay. It doesn't really start with 1, so I guess whatever this is. Well, 1 to 25. There we go. And it should say it over here. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to move that into stage. Let's go down and look at stage, make sure it's empty. Now, notice these have dev, QA, and things like that. Again, that's a relative. This could be as anything you want. Sorry, I was trying to pull this up. Let's go ahead and look. Hopefully this is empty. It is empty. So first step is to move all these records right here from here down to here. Then we want to look at our QA. Now QA can be our source 2. Inside of our source 2, what we're looking at is we want to move only the ones that are not found in source 1 down. So for an example, I've added an extra one here. So this should have, now this has a lot of records, 1 through 50, because there's duplicates in here, probably. Yep, I can see them there. But that's okay, because we filter those out. The only one I really care about is this last one right here, because it's unique, okay? So we'll talk about how to manage that as well. Now, first of all, this is Javelin. This video won't be so much on how to use Javelin. I may do more videos on that. But this is more about how I built your flow and maybe move over to some best practices. So step number 1 is to clean the data. Now the first thing I do is I delete all the records because I want to start with a clean slate inside of the stage. Okay, so if we look at this real quick, that basically just says delete everything from stage in this table. Now this could be used for deleting other things as well, right? From whatever. So this could be one way to clean your data. Okay. So then if I go down this next, well, let me talk about this first. This clean data target, if you move over here, I can see it's a SQL Server activity. So on the left-hand side is your controls. Now, so this wasn't a training video for Javelin, but you're going to have to see how some of it works along the way, right? So let's go over and look. We got SQL Server. Now that's execute activity. If I bring it over, you notice it's the same. What this does is this pretty much runs a query call. Now, here I could hit test and it will go delete that data for me. There's nothing in there, so that's fine. I'll hit and notice it would have done its action. Everything that builds these controls are based off of your properties over here on this side. Okay. Now, sorry, somebody's pinging me on Skype, but if I look through here, I can see my server, I can see my SQL call, I can see I'm using SA, and best practice, I have my password hidden. Now I can use it as a variable, but I believe most of the times you can see variables. I think there is a password variable, but these are variables. Now variables are passed along. You're going to see this very shortly. The best practice is I would put my server name in here, and we'll just call it this. That way it's easier to move between environments, and it's also more manageable because I'm only doing it in one location. So server name, and now I can use that variable up here in that place. And that works just fine. So if we test it again, it still works. No records returned because we already deleted everything. Now, if we go down to here, oh, you know what? The problem is, I'm sorry, this is a string value. So now at work, I apologize. These, notice I have as a string value, so therefore it has to be a string value. Now if I hit test, Still no returns because there's none. Okay, but notice I don't have the red error anymore. Now the next thing we do is do a log. Now your system log, you can tell it what to log, whatever you want. I could say even something like, Tim's test. And now this is a string, so we're going to concatenate it. So just do the concatenation like that. And notice my error message went away. So the next step we want to say, so the first step we did was we deleted the data, okay? Just for kicks and giggles, just for the sake of getting this done the way I showed earlier, I want to keep everything consistent. But now the first thing I want to do is hit log. Again, we just talked about that. Now I'm going into the main data. Now the main data here, now I renamed these to what makes sense to me. If I go over here to bulk actions, I can see that it, now if I go over to bulk actions, I can see that it's one of these over here that I'm using. Truth is, it's this one, okay? I believe it's that one. Nope, not that one. We are using that one, but we'll get to that one in a few seconds. Nope, not DB2, just a DB reader. So it's our DB reader, and what's going to happen is when we go, notice these properties, but when I dig deeper into it, I can get a better view. So it's the same thing, server name, database. Here though, in my SQL call, I'm doing a little bit different, okay? And here I'm saying, give me everything. Now the truth is I can do a star and that would give me everything. And then what that is doing though, is that's returning it to a data reader, okay? Now, down here, this data reader is called temp data, which is here. Notice it's an iData reader. Now these you can change, okay? And if you don't see the one you're looking for, browse for it. And what I do is I just type in what I'm looking for and I can see it come up, okay? Now, what's seeing that, a data reader is basically a one-way reader just from data, right? It's just a quick read. So if I go back into here, I'm reading the data and then I'm pushing the data down to one of the bulk copies. So if I go back over here and look, this bulk copy is saying I want to go to the adjuster table. I'm using the reader from this reader right here. And these are just my database connections. No big deal. Nothing magical there. Pretty straight out. But the only thing it's saying is give me everything inside adjusters from this table. Notice that's what we call our source. And select everything into this reader and then push that reader down to this bulk copy control, which is over here. Okay. That is this one right here. And the reason I'm showing you that is because Oracle's going to have the same one. If I drag the Oracle one over, oh, well, let me make some inside of a flow. If I drag the Oracle one over, if you notice, it looks exactly like the SQL one does. So let's get rid of that. So the first thing we're doing is we're deleting our data. Okay. Then we're getting everything from the adjuster table and we're copying it over. So let's go ahead and see that happen. I'm going to break the connection, which means it will end here. We're going to copy everything over to our target. Okay. It just wants me to save it before I run it. And just like that, it's done. So now if I go look at my target, is this target? Nope, that's QA. Well, I say target and source because that's TDM terms. In this case, it should be stage, but it copied everything over to stage. And it did. And look, Tim's missing. Now we've only got the 25 records that were coming out of our source, or what we call source one, is that what we call it? Which is out of this database, okay? Now, the next step is fairly simple. Now we're going to do another SQL activity. Now here, this SQL activity is embedded inside of this, see? But here I'm using it external because I only want the data to output first. So if we look at that, I'm bringing it to an out data type, but that's a little bit different because it's not a reader, it's a data table. Now a data table is inexchangeable. So if you know .NET or any of your programming stuff, the reader really is just taking a SQL reader, a one put select, and it's copying it to memory. A data reader is really like a CSV file that you can do stuff with it. Okay, now it's still in memory, but you can interact it, like you can add data from other sources, you can delete, you can do all kind of stuff with it because now it's in this physical like table thing. But if I go up here, well, let me show you this, I'm sorry. So my select here, again, the settings are the same. If we look at the select does a little bit different. Let's go over and create another little window. Now this is not a string, so let's get rid of these. Now what I'm saying is give me everything in my QA or my source 2 that is not found inside stage. Okay, so I no longer care about source 1. The only thing I care about is moving data into stage. So now when I run this, I can see Tim Higgins is not found inside stage. And that's what that query does. So let's go back over here, cancel. And now that query is going to come up here. Again, I'm going to do a log, no big deal. And I could put the data here if I wanted to, but I'm really just doing a timestamp. Really, these are kind of like pauses for me because I can run and debug. So it's kind of like a pause along the way, just long enough to write out the timestamp. Now here, we're saying that's fine, but my SQL load won't take a data table. It needs a data reader. So what I'm doing is I'm taking my data table and I'm creating a reader out of it. And that creates us into our data reader 2. Now, in all honesty, best practices, you want naming conventions that make sense to you. But in this case, I'm just making it obvious. So here's our data 2. Again, we're going to log, and then I'm going to push it into my bulk load. Now, if you remember up here, we did the same thing, but it's here. So it's kind of deep inside this. The biggest difference is here, I only stayed with a data reader. Here, I took it to a data table so I can actually do stuff with it, okay? Now, when that comes down, we're going to push it straight through. Now, the truth is, you probably could do the same thing here. I'm just doing different things so you can see that there's options with this. So if I need more data to come from somewhere else, it could come in here. So if you think about your ETL process, there's extract, which, well, that's cleanup. Here we're extracting and loading because we're loading it into temp, our stage, I'm sorry. Here we're extracting again, and then we're manipulating it if we wanted to, and then we're pushing it or loading it into our temp table. So let's see it from beginning to end, and it's fine because it's going to delete the data anyway, and that's why I put that in there. So we always get a clean run every time. Now, when you build this out, you may not do that, but for demo purposes, it makes sense. That way I don't have a lot of data, garbage data in there. So we're going to run it. And now it's actually going through the steps of doing the bulk load, which means it's done. So we're going to go ahead and stop it. And if I go over here and do, let's look for our stage. Nope, that's QA. And here's stage. So let's go ahead and run it. Now I've got the data I expected, and I've got Tim Higgins. So what this did, if we go back to here, is we took our source, we moved it straight to stage. And then we took our source 2, in this case would be what I called QA. Oops. So in QA, we only wanted what wasn't, and so now I'm doing post tense because we already did it, what wasn't in source 1, and we want to move that to stage, and we did that. Okay, and again, you could repeat this process. It's pretty simple. If we wanted a 3 or 4 or 5, and all you would have to do is just copy and paste that copy function, this one right here, and you would, once you copy it, you would just change whatever table you want. It would produce a different data frame. So you'd have to data table. So you'd have to copy and paste another one of these, but this should be pretty much the same. So that's really it. Now, Javelin again, I'll talk a little bit about best practices. Number one, Javelin's a file. That's good and bad and ugly. So here's the file. The bad news is you could lose it. The good news is you can back it up, right? Because it's just a file. I can just say copy and paste, and I just backed it up. You can also use Windows Scheduler, which I have for many clients. Sorry, I'm trying to delete that. That will allow you to schedule a file. You can create a batch file. You can create any code you want to run this file. If you double click on it and you've got it installed, it pops up with a chart. You can run it. If you run a debug, it does each step at a time, so you can see it. Verbose logging will give you more logging over here. Pretty common sense on that one. Start with a variable is you can have your variables, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, on a different page. For an example, I can export my variables here. We'll just do it on desktop so we can see. And that puts a copy of my variables that I can import, which that's the only, oh, that was the only one that had value. The other ones didn't have value, so they didn't get exported. That way, if I go to another project and import those in, then I don't have to re-enter the values. Okay, and the reason we say that is this one has a default value. Now, it wouldn't make sense to export these because they don't have values. Now, if I wanted to move this, now we're looking at two of these, so let me close this one just because I double clicked on it. If I wanted to move this, the other best practice, like I said, is move all these string values. You can even put your query into a variable. So, because it's just a string value, right? So query one, it's a string. Let's do this. And that way you don't lose the value, or if you need to copy and paste it somewhere else, you have a visual of where it would be. So I'll just copy and we'll stick that. Make sure I'm on the bottom line. Oops. Right here. And then I have an error, which I just don't think it likes white spaces. But once it's in there, then I can put the query name up in there. So you'd have to open it up. And, oh, see, it didn't copy and paste everything. There we go. So you gotta be careful with that too. You have to open it up to get everything to copy in. Now, all I gotta do is do this, and it will still work. Okay. All right, so that's it for now. I'll do more videos to give you more demos to get detailed, but I don't want these demos to be too long.